We're about to go inside a sprawling shadow economy, one built on human trafficking and forced crime. This is a crisis that's been festering in the dark for years, until a tragic death finally dragged it into the light. This is the story of Cambodia's job scam compounds. Picture this: Sihanoukville, Cambodia. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. The air is thick, it's heavy, and in a city known as a hub for Chinese investment and casinos, something is happening in the dead of night. Look, from behind these high walls, a steady stream of people and vehicles is just pouring out into the darkness. But this isn't some late-night party. This is an escape. So what you're seeing here is the frantic evacuation of a massive criminal compound. The locals call them Wenchis, and these places, they're basically the nerve centers for huge online scam operations. And tonight, for some reason, they're emptying out. You've got vans and buses lining the exit, their engines running. Guards are meticulously checking the ID of every single person. It's organized, but it's totally frantic. So why all the chaos? Well, it turns out there was a tip-off. Word leaked that a police raid was coming, and that forced the syndicates to move. The fact that they were warned, that raises some really serious questions about how deep the corruption here actually runs. So how in the world do people end up inside these fortresses in the first place? For thousands of them, especially young people from countries like South Korea, it almost never starts with a threat. No, it starts with a promise. On one hand, you've got the promise, plastered all over the internet. High-paying jobs in IT or telemarketing, a chance to earn thousands of dollars a month, a shot at a whole new life. But the second they land, that dream turns into an absolute nightmare. Their passports are taken, they're locked inside guarded walls, and forced to carry out voice phishing and romance scams, usually targeting people from back in their own countries. And the way they do it, it is just chillingly methodical. First, they find you online without promise of a huge salary. Then you're greeted at the airport by your so-called employers, and in an instant, your passport and your phone are gone. Just like that, you're a prisoner, forced into a life of crime under constant threat. It's honestly hard to even imagine what it's like for the people trapped inside. The psychological toll, the physical abuse, it's immense. The stories from rescued survivors paint this absolutely harrowing picture of what life is like inside these scam factories. Listen to this from one of the victims who was rescued. He recalled the exact moment the lie just completely fell apart. He said he was told he'd learn the job details on site. When he got there, it wasn't a corporate office, it was a boiler room. A full-blown voice phishing operation. His dream job was a front. And if you don't comply, the consequences are just brutal. Another survivor gave this chilling testimony. If workers fainted from exhaustion, they'd be woken up with electric shocks. Trying to run was an automatic death sentence. He said he personally watched them beat another captive, a Chinese national, to death for trying to escape. You might be wondering, why don't they just run? Well, escape is designed to be pretty much impossible. These Wenchis are fortresses. We're talking walls over 4 meters high, topped with razor wire and sharp, jagged glass. There is only one way out, and it's through a single, heavily guarded gate. And then, this past August, something happened that turned this crisis into a full-blown international incident. A 20-year-old South Korean university student who was being held captive was tortured to death. His murder blew the lid off the brutal reality of these operations and finally forced governments to act. As you can imagine, the news of the student's murder sent absolute shockwaves through South Korea, and it put immense pressure on Cambodia's government. And suddenly, after months, in some cases years, of families pleading for help, official action finally started to ramp up. But when you actually look at the timeline, you really see the delay. Cambodia's prime minister had approved an anti-scam operation way back in July, but it was only after the student's death in August that South Korea's government truly escalated its response. That's when they issued a black alert travel ban in October and sent in a joint response team. So what is South Korea actually doing now? Well, the new plan has a few key parts. They're setting up a special Korean desk inside the Cambodian police force to speed things up. They're doubling the number of police liaisons on the ground. And critically, they're going after the recruitment networks back home that are feeding victims into this pipeline. But for the victims and for the families who have been screaming for help for so long, all of this just raises a really tough question. Why now? Why did it take so long? I mean, this crisis was an open secret. You have to understand, long before this hit the headlines, these families were completely on their own. They were forming online chat groups, sharing any scrap of information they could find, and pleading with anyone who would listen. But their official requests for help, they often went nowhere. And then this came out, and it is just stunning. A formal request just last year to increase the number of police personnel in Cambodia was actually denied by South Korea's foreign ministry. Their official reason? They cited low necessity. A critical opportunity to get ahead of this was just tragically missed. So it all comes back to this one central, unavoidable question. The warnings were there. The pleas for help were constant. Why did it take the torture and murder of a young man to finally trigger a full-scale international response? And here's the real kicker. Even now, with authorities finally raiding these compounds, the problem isn't actually being solved. It's just moving. Thanks to those leaks, the criminal syndicates are just packing up and relocating to more remote parts of Cambodia or even across the border into countries like Myanmar. So yeah, the crackdown might have scattered these criminal groups, but it hasn't dismantled their networks. And as they just melt back into the shadows to set up new operations, we're left with this one final, really haunting question. For every single person who's been rescued, how many more are still out there, trapped, their calls for help still unheard?